let's get to the news and views. I know some people think this is boring, but you've got to get, there is insight and intel in the first hour as well. I kind of select certain stories, so it also gives insight on an intel basis as well. And the first one, head of the UN body that leads sustainability and green issues, have been criticised for extensive and expensive air travel this week. Another audit has gone ahead. You're going to hear that term audit an awful lot between now and the end of the year, not just the UN. So anyway, a draft internal audit obtained by The Guardian and the BBC says that Eric Solheim's actions risks the reputation of the UN environment. Really? I didn't realise they had one. And the report says he incurred costs of $488,500 while travelling for 429 out of 668 days. And there was, fittingly, and this is a common theme, and also this will be addressed going forward also, there is no oversight or accountability to monitor this type of travel. And Mr. Solheim says he has paid back the money where instances of oversight occurred, and the audit was carried out by the UN's Office of Internal Oversight across the UN environment. And as I said, 58 million was spent on travel in the 2 years up to 2018. $58 million for the UN goons to travel around and threaten people, generally, or steal children or child traffic. And the OIOS points out that the amount of money the UN environment spends on travel essentially doubled over the 3 years between 2014 and 2017. There's your example. That's when they were really cut off from funding. While all UN staff are expected to complete mission reports within 2 weeks of travel. Hi, Drake. OIOS found out these were often missing, and they were requested reports of 596 trips undertaken by 32 managers and staff. 210 mission reports were not provided, while around another 200 were only completed after the request was made. And the report was severely critical of Mr. Solheim, the UN Environment Executive Director since 2016, and who was a former Norwegian Environment Minister. NATO connected. Mr. Solheim's leave and travel were approved by a member of his office who reported directly to him in contravention of UN rules. Audit and oversight will be the word going forward. Trust me. Oh boy. US Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, TikTok, as mentioned 12 months ago, has denied the report that he discussed invoking a constitutional clause to oust President Donald Trump, and America's second most senior law official said it was inaccurate and factually incorrect. Now, the New York Times, who were citing anonymous sources, also said Mr. Rosenstein had suggested secretly recording Mr. Trump to expose chaos in the White House. Yes, they have been recording. Whether it was Rosenstein is another matter. We'll have more than that in the second hour. But a source tells the BBC that a comment was made sarcastically. No, I won't make that comment. The remarks allegedly happened after Mr. Trump fired the FBI director last year, and James Comey has been overseeing his law enforcement's investigation into alleged ties between the Trump campaign and boring Russia. Mr. Trump referred to the Russian thing when asked why he was removed, and reported that Mr. Rosenstein had discussed recruiting cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment of the US Constitution, which provided for the removal of the president if he is deemed unfit for office. It also suggested he's secretly recording Trump to expose turmoil and dysfunction. Yes, you don't have to secretly record that, because it is turmoil and dysfunction. Whilst the Pentagon is sending puppets to the UN to talk about war and sanctions this week, the real issue is why they're not looking after their soldiers and former soldiers. And the number of suicides among younger veterans has increased substantially, according to a new report released yesterday by the Department of Veteran Affairs. Now, the latest statistics show that 45 out of every 100,000 veteran ages between 18 and 34 committed suicide in 2016, up by 12.5%. And these findings underscore the fact that suicide is a national public health issue that affects communities everywhere, the VA said in a statement, and our goal is to prevent suicide among all veterans, even those who do not and may never seek care within the veterans system. The VA found that there were more than 6,000 veteran suicides each year from 2008 through 2016. And veterans accounted for 14% of all suicides in the United States, and yet the veterans comprise of just 8% of the population. Mr. Vogel, focus on that, not sanctions. Iranian leaders have accused US-backed Gulf states of being behind an attack on a military parade this week that killed 25 people, including a child. The leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said puppets of the US were trying to create insecurity in Iran, and gunmen opened fire at Revolutionary Guard troops and officials in the southwest city of Ahvaz. Earlier, an anti-government Arab group, Ahvaz National Resistance, and ISIS both claimed the attacks. There's those honest criminals again, like that ever happens. How people believe that is beyond me. It's when a criminal admitted that they, I'll rob a bank and I'll call the police and own up to doing it. Like it ever happens. Except all these terrorists all admit it. Strange. However, neither group provided any evidence to show that they were involved. Earlier, Foreign Minister Javed Zarif blamed terrorists paid by a foreign regime, adding that Iran holds regional terror sponsors and their US masters accountable. Iran has summoned diplomats from the UK, the Netherlands, Holland and Denmark, accusing their countries of harbouring Iranian opposition groups. And he went on to say it's not acceptable that these groups are not listed as terrorist organisations by the European Union as long as they have not carried out a terrorist attack in Europe. And this was said by the Foreign Ministry spokesman Bahram Khuzemi. Reports say nearly half of those killed were members of the Revolutionary Guard, who are under Mr. Khamenei's command. White helmets involved in that. That name will come up later on in the Q&A. Switzerland. I wish they'd do more than just do this. There's a cancer on your soil called the Rothschilds. Nice if you removed them. Anyway, they're going to the polls on Sunday in not one but two votes, which campaigners say will promote ethical and sustainable food. Now, the votes follow scandals in the last few years over horse meat in lasagna and the destruction of the rainforest to make way for palm oil and cattle ranching. And they reflect a growing consumer interest not just in Switzerland but across Europe, where food comes from and also how it's produced. Now, Switzerland's system of direct democracy means campaigners simply have to gather 100,000 signatures to ensure a nationwide vote on a political issue. Yes, we have that here, except he ignored it. Yes, you, Obama, clothhead. And the first proposal, called Fair Food, wants more government support for sustainable, animal-friendly products and more detailed labelling so consumers know what they are actually buying. It's also called for a crackdown on food waste and for imports to meet Swiss standards on worker conditions, environmental safety and also animal welfare. Now, this would mean Swiss inspectors checking foreign food producers for compliance, and the second call for food sovereignty goes even further, calling for much greater support for local family farms or higher tariffs on food imports, and for foreign produce that does not meet Swiss standards to be banned. Many Swiss farmers support the proposals. Sounds interesting. Another one bites the dust this time. A Kenyan governor, Mr. Obado, was being charged in court this week with aiding and abetting the brutal murder of his ex-girlfriend and who was a pregnant student. The married governor pleaded not guilty to the charge, and his arrest followed weeks of public anger after the body of Sharon Otinio, who's 26, was found in a forest. A post-mortem revealed she had possibly been raped and stabbed in the neck 8 times, and also the abdomen and the back. She lost her unborn child during the attack. Mr. Obado, the governor of Migori County, has been remanded in custody pending the outcome of his bail application next Tuesday. They'll all get in court. This is something I came across which could well be interesting. It also has dangers with transhumanist, and there must be a boundary set. But 3 patients. See, this is another item where people think technology is all the future. It's not. I keep telling you, it's all the past, long past. And these 3 patients were all paralysed from the waist down and have been able to walk again after having an electrical patch fitted to their spinal cords. Well, experts say the device, which is placed below the injury, helps lost signals from the brain reach the leg muscles. And US research teams at the University of Louisville and the Mayo Clinic report the success in the Nature Medicine and the New England Journal of Medicine magazine this week. Now, one of the recipients says her life has been transformed by the technology. A lady by the name, or young girl by the name of Kelly Thomas from Florida, is one of the 2 patients at the University of Louisville who's been helped by this particular development, which has been combined with months of intensive rehabilitation therapy. She said, being a participant in this study has truly changed my life, and it's provided me with a hope that I didn't think was possible after my car accident. And the first day I took steps on my own was an emotional milestone in my recovery that I'll never forget. As 1 minute I was walking with the trainer's assistants, and while they stopped, I continued to walk on my own. It's amazing what the human body can accomplish with help from research and technology. Absolutely, and we wish those 3 well. And that type of development and research should be heavily funded and not the weaponized funding and research. China has sent a hospital ship, thankfully, and is now docked in Venezuela, where for the next week it will provide free health care to local patients. And Venezuela's defense minister, Mr. Lopez, went to the port of La Guaira to welcome the Chinese crew. He said the Peace Ark's visit was agreed by the president, Nicolas Maduro, during a visit to Beijing last week. Venezuela agreed at the time to increase its exports of oil, bacteria poop, to China, which is one of its main creditors. Now, Venezuela's economic crisis has led to severe food shortages and medicines and the collapse of public services. But the opposition says the presence of a Chinese hospital ship in Venezuela shows the extent of the humanitarian crisis. And Mr. Lopez thanked China for the gesture of friendship and said that both countries would benefit. It's a pleasure to have this ship in Venezuela, which has arrived here after travelling to more than 40 countries, he said. This is how true diplomacy is done, with concrete cooperative actions. One hopes it's not just about oil and people start doing it without bargaining for oil or bargaining for this. But it's a nice gesture nonetheless. Pakistan's leader, Imran Khan, warned India that his offer of friendship should not be seen as weakness, while urging India to abandon arrogance to enable peace talks. The Prime Minister of Pakistan made a comment in response to what he branded India's arrogant decision on Friday to cancel a meeting between the country's foreign ministers in New York on the sidelines of the up-and-coming United Nations General Assembly. And he said, I hope the Indian leadership will shun arrogance and hold peace talks with Pakistan. During Mr. Khan's visit of the eastern Pakistani city of Lahore. India last week agreed to a meeting with Pakistan in the US capital after Khan wrote a letter to his Indian counterpart Narendra Modi to ask him to resume talks for some stability in the region. But the Indian government U-turned on its decision on Friday over what it said was the brutal killing of 3 policemen in Kashmir at the hands of Hizbul Mujahideen militants. Indian Ministry of External Affairs said the killing, as well as the distribution of postage stamps purportedly glorifying terrorism, show the evil agenda of Pakistan and the true face of its PM, according to the spokesman Ravish Kumar. For those that don't know what the real issue is with India and Pakistan, is it's been going on many years, and the region known as Kashmir, which was a song by Led Zeppelin, with the line, "We are a traveller of both time and space." The real reason for the fight over Kashmir is so the order can keep that region free of both country peoples, so it can protect the reptilian base hidden in those mountains. Meanwhile, the people of India and Pakistan suffer violence over some nonsense that has no bearing to any of the countries or its people. Russia's decision to deliver S-300 air defence systems to Syria will face Israel's counteraction and might be used against the Jewish state as a pretext for receiving more advanced weapons from the United States, experts said on Monday. Earlier in the day, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced measures on increasing security of Russian servicemen in response to the crash of the Russian Tu-20 military aircraft in Syria, which Russia believes Israel was responsible for. Now, according to the minister, Russia would equip the Syrian Air Defense Forces command posts with automatic control systems which had been previously possessed only by Russia. They will send JAM satellite navigation, onboard radars and communication systems of combat aviation attacking Syrian targets, and most importantly, supply the S-300 air defence system to Syria. Now, announcing the deliveries of the Russian air defence systems, they indicated that Russia did initially suspend the shipments of S-300 systems to Syria at Israel's request in 2013, but stressed that since that situation has changed, and not through the fault of Russia. The United States will, this announcement from NASA, never a straight answer, and perhaps it really should be termed SSA. But their comments this week is that the United States, which has nothing to do with America, and neither is NASA for that matter, will work with Russia to maintain cooperation in space programs and keep joint exploration efforts separate from the terrestrial tensions between Washington and Moscow. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, oh dear, every time, isn't it? Told guests at the Space Business Roundtable on Monday, we've been able to make sure that space is set apart from all of these sometimes terrestrial challenges we have with our international partners, especially Russia. Bridenstine said, so it's my intent to keep that relationship strong. Really, that may be your intent, Mr. Bridenstine. It's not ours. What we need with the NASA is them shut down altogether and repurposed for the new space program being implemented by the current government. And what we also need is full government transparency on all levels in both countries that JFK and Mr. Brezhnev signed on January the 11th, 1963. What we don't need is more SS small p games. Notice they distinguished between space and terrestrial. Very cleverly worded and not lost on me either. These people are a breakaway group who think they're above and beyond the rest of humanity and have obtained technology through rogue purposes and selling humanity out to rogue ETs and rogue NTs, non-terrestrial. Now, if the government's involved, or the governments get involved in the space program, what would happen is all the levels of secrecy documents that are currently above the president by about 26 levels would have to be declassified. I would suggest Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump get together and sign that again and shut these goons down. Where are we next? The height of staggering hypocrisy comes next. an organisation of Mormon women formed in response to President Trump's election, is calling for the 4 Mormon members of the Senate Judiciary Committee to pause hearings for Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett M. Kavanaugh until the claims of 2 women alleging sexual misconduct can be investigated. Mormon Women for Ethical Government, oh dear, issued a statement on Monday to the committee, and in particular it said, "To the 4 members who share our faith as members of the Church of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, GOP Senator Orrin G. Hatch, Mike Lee of Utah, Jeff Flake of Arizona, and Mike Crapo of Idaho. Given the seriousness of the allegations levied against Judge Kavanaugh," the group's statement read, "a thorough independent investigation must be conducted to ensure that these charges be taken seriously and that every attempt to be made to ascertain the truth of the situation. Our mutual faith teaches that any sexual abuse or assault in any context is contemptible and worthy of the most severe condemnation." Oh my word. The staggering hypocrisy of that region and that group. Mormons complaining of others committing sex acts. You have no idea. For those that don't know, the Mormon group are known for child sexual acts, swapping of each other's children for sexual acts, and general debauchery. Multiple partners is the way of life of many of the Mormons. And those who come into the community who are not Mormons must abide by those rules, according to the few people that I've spoken to personally who had Mormon partners. Those of you with long memories will remember the guy called Bill Brockerbader, who was on the Kerry Cassidy show around 9 or 10 years ago. He's a Mormon and was sentenced for sleeping with his niece, who was aged 12 or 16. It was not clear which. But it became apparent that this was the accepted norm in that community. Unless, of course, you pissed off the authorities. Then they used it against you. So for me, the Mormon community needs to clean up their own act before criticising or chiming in on any other alleged crime of others. Salt Lake City is an epidemic of it. So they need to clean their own house before they start chiming in on what others are doing. Here's an interesting story about bacteria poop. And the world's biggest oil and gas companies have made an unprecedented vow this week to cut their contributions to global warming, even as they warned of a potential backlash and pushing change too quickly. The collection of 13 energy harvesters, luminaires, same thing, including the heads of BP, Royal Dutch Shell, all gathered in New York on Monday to acknowledge the need to reduce the planet's reliance on bacteria poop. Not fossil fuel. It's not fossil fuels. It's bacteria poop. But they said a long road lies ahead that's filled with political and technological challenges, really, and insisted petroleum will remain a key source of fuel for a growing population. But it did say the product portfolio will have to evolve, and I think we have a role in making that evolution, according to the Shell chief executive, Ben van Beurden. And he added, all these things we cannot do by forcing it down people's throats, really. And in the end, it's the consumer that has to decide. Well, the consumer decided we don't want bacteria poop a long time ago, and we're still waiting. Anyway, after years of negotiations, American oil majors Exxon, Chevron and also Occidental Petroleum Corporation agreed to join last week. And the company's president on Monday announced a collective pledge to cut the rate of heat-trapping methane pollution from their operations by 1/5 in the next 7 years, a move that would reduce overall emissions by 350,000 tonnes per year. And the 13 businesses have also created a $1.3 billion investment fund to seed startups that are aiming to cut emissions from vehicles, oil wells, concrete production, and other top sources of so-called greenhouse gases. Interesting move. Are times changing? I'll wait for time. 2 more, and then we'll go into a break. What are we going to play? Let's go with that. Right. This goes on what I mentioned last week about the transphobic and all the other nonsense. Last week it was in Sweden. This week it's in my home birth town in Liverpool. And a billboard poster bearing the Google definition of the word woman has been removed after it was accused of being part of a transphobic campaign. Kelly J. Keane Minchell told the BBC she paid £700, which is about $1,000, to have woman, women, noun, adult, female put up. But it was removed after an LGBT activist complained Ms. Minchell's campaign represented a hate group. So women are now hate groups. Ms. Minchell denied the allegation but said the idea that trans women were women was preposterous. And when asked why the poster was erected in Liverpool, where the Labour Party annual conference has taken place, he said it was in response to the City Mayor Joe Anderson, who recently voiced his support for the trans community. Now, Dr. Adrian Harrop, whose complaint led to the poster's removal, said the billboard was a symbol that makes transgender people feel unsafe. Really? So a 30-foot by 20-foot piece of paper with words on makes somebody feel unsafe. This is getting beyond the joke now. It really is. Way beyond it. You know, people can call themselves whatever they like, but please leave the public and their funds out of it. You have no idea. I've worked in social services. Vast amounts of public funds and resources are being wasted on these labelled groups, whether it's lesbian, gay, transsexual, women, black, you name it. And for what purpose? Divide and conquer. Pure and simple. That's the top and bottom line of it. I nearly got fired for asking, where is the group for white heterosexual males? When I was in the UK back in the 90s. And it was suggested that I was being racist and sexist. And my reply was, well, if you leave a group of people out, isn't that racist and sexist? And I told them, you people need to stop enforcing this shit and need to wake up. What was taking place is 2 days each month for every lesbian, gay and transsexual women and blacks, as they were called back there, including the Chinese, which really got them upset being labelled black, to attend meetings for their specific groups. So, for instance, if you are a lesbian, women and black, you got 6 days a month off. And yet no meetings for whites, no meetings for males, unless you were gay, and no meetings for heterosexuals. You just can't make this shit up. Well, they did, and we fell for it. It's all divide and conquer. And that's what happens when you start labelling and making people different from others. So now you've got people calling women campaigners a hate group. It boggles the mind. US President Donald Trump, this is the final news item before we go into a music break and some intel. Mr. Trump has urged other members of the UN Security Council to work with America to ensure Iran never acquires a nuclear bomb. He was chairing a council meeting this week, and he said anyone who failed to comply with the US sanctions would face severe consequences. America is reimposing sanctions after pulling out of the international deal on Iran's nuclear program. Iran hit back by accusing Mr. Trump of abusing the Security Council. I told you it was wading through bullshittery, didn't I? It's just unreal. So French President Emmanuel Macron, who still backs the 2015 deal, called for a long-term strategy. You won't be around long enough to see it, mate. Perhaps Mr. Trump needs to pay more attention to this show rather than SS small p generals and their war mentality. We have warned. Iran already has nuclear weapons from as far back as 1984. We have the documented proof to show it, when Israel sold them nuclear weapons to Iran. Oops. Iran also has F-14s and went on to develop their own after USA sold 18 F-14s to them also in the 1980s. So you see, where money is concerned, it doesn't really matter, does it? We'll sell them to everyone, and then further down the line we'll call that country a problem. And this is how the order and how they plan to use countries as political footballs at various stages. So everyone hates or fears on that country. It doesn't matter, does it? These people will sell to both sides of the so-called divide. There is no divide. The reality is no countries are at war with each other. None. And all countries are being used in a massive divide and conquer tactic, and it's time more leaders get a grasp on that. Like India and Pakistan fighting over Kashmir. It's all fake. All to protect the reptilian base over there. It's all an illusion. Now, regarding the UN Convention, perhaps I'm not thinking straight these days, but I thought that the UN Convention was about world leaders engaging each other. Kim said I was rather silly thinking that. Being sarcastic. But clearly not, as up stepped General Vogel, there's those names again, from the Pentagon war machine and stepped onto the podium. But since when has the Pentagon become a world leader? Think SS. P. So should we be worried about all these nuclear issues? Maybe you remember this bit. Well, you're all going to die. No, we're not. For anyone worried about nuclear war, forget it. The final codes for launch is held within the trust, and Kim will not be giving them out, ever.